Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. I know I did. I just graduated from college, so this is my first show as a college alumni. Very excited, but we have a lot to talk about. We have some breaking news that happened right before the show. I had to switch up the plan, including Jared Goff's massive near market setting resetting contract that was given out by the Lions today. We'll talk about that in the first segment. We'll talk about the other massive NFL contract that was given out today. The Bucks gave Antoine Winfield Jr. a huge contract. We will talk about that in the second segment. Then we'll transition into the NBA. We'll talk about the playoff series, the two big playoff series that are back even at 2 apiece after massive comebacks from both the Pacers and the Nuggets. And we'll finish off our show talking about the NBA draft lottery. The Hawks win the draft lottery despite making the play-ins this season. So we'll talk about that, the implications of all of that, and more. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message will pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. We appreciate anything you do give. Leave a comment, leave a like, interact if you have anything to say. I keep my eyes on that at all times. So like I was saying, appreciate anything you do give. The link to leave a donation is gsmcpodcast.net. But without further ado, like I said, we have a lot to talk about today. So we're just going to jump right into it with some breaking news, actually. So we'll play this little graphic for you. Breaking news. Breaking news today, just about 20 minutes before our show went live, Jared Goff has been extended. A 4-year, $214 million deal for the Lions quarterback. His second massive contract of his career after having a really good couple of seasons, right after having maybe the worst stretch of his career. He comes into the league with the Rams and leads them to a Super Bowl. Looks really good in the Sean McVay system, and then he kind of just falls off the face of the earth. There's basically a one-for-one swap with him and Jared Goff, and now he goes to Detroit. He revamps his career, revitalizes it, takes Detroit to the NFC Championship game last year against the 49ers. It's a great turnaround for him, and he is now the second highest paid quarterback by year, only trailing Joe Burrow. He gets $52 million per year. He's ahead of Joe Burrow. Sorry, he's behind Joe Burrow, who's making 55, but he's ahead of Justin Herbert. He's ahead of all these guys that are making $50+ million a year. It's an interesting thing because Jared Goff is not what you would call an elite quarterback, or at least not what I would call an elite quarterback. And I think right now, for the first time, we're starting to see quarterbacks not continue to reset the market. You know, you saw Joe Burrow obviously has the top of the market right now, but you're seeing guys come up for contract like Dak Prescott, and he's looking to reset the market, and the Cowboys are not willing to give him that market resetting money. We're seeing that this is the first massive QB contract since then to not reset the market. You know, it's not like a huge pay cut. He's the second highest paid quarterback in the league, but he's not getting paid more than Joe Burrow per year. So this is what I think we're going to start to see with the future of money for quarterbacks. You know, we've reached that tipping point where we can't really just keep resetting the market every time it's your turn. You know, you have to actually deserve it, and I think that's a great thing. Front offices are stopping writing blank checks for quarterbacks. They're seeing teams like the 49ers be able to build with great players around them rather than spending all your resources on a quarterback and have it become like the Chargers who have Justin Herbert, who's making $52.5 million a year, and the Chargers can't get anything done. Now, I'm boiling this argument down a lot more than it should be. You know, there's a lot of different factors for why the Chargers haven't been good and the 49ers have been good. But in essence, you can kind of say, hey, this is what's going on. You've got your teams that are paying quarterbacks and teams that aren't. And we're starting to see a shift in attitude where quarterbacks aren't being paid. Again, not a great example, but Daniel Jones, he didn't reset the market. Baker Mayfield, he didn't reset the market. Kirk Cousins, he didn't reset the market. These guys aren't market resetting value, but they're getting good contracts, and I think this is what we're going to start to see. We're going to start to see this new tier of quarterback contracts start to pop up. When your Patrick Mahomes come up for contract, he's still going to reset the market. When CJ Stroud comes up for his second contract, he's still going to reset the market. But what you're not going to start to see is guys like, say, Bryce Young come up and reset the market. You know, Trevor Lawrence might reset the market. I get the feeling that Jacksonville isn't willing to pay him $60 million a year. Dak Prescott isn't going to reset the market unless some other team pays him, most likely at least. But we're starting to see a shift, and I think this is a good thing for the NFL in general. There were talks a couple years ago when we get to the CBA in a few years to do a whole nother cap thing for quarterbacks, and there was a conversation with running backs how positions should have minimums and maximums depending on what you reach, and that conversation never really got pushed too far. But I can see a world where quarterbacks continue to get more and more of the salary cap, where teams are like, hey, we understand the quarterback needs to be paid this much. Can we just have a separate amount for quarterbacks? And it's something that I've heard talked about, not too seriously before. Is an interesting idea, and I think teams just need to start to move away from paying the quarterbacks $80 million a year. It gets to a point where you have to stop. I mean, the cap is here at what, $250 million this year. You're giving 25% of it to one guy, and it can work. The Lions have done a really good job building their team. They signed Amon-Ra. They signed Penei Sewell. And then they signed their quarterback. They took care of their quarterback last. They made sure that they got everybody else taken care of before they went out and they locked in Jared Goff. Jared Goff, who, if I had to put him off the top of my head in a list of top quarterbacks in the league, he wouldn't crack the top 10. $50 million is still an overpay. But the silver lining in this contract for the Lions is you get a guy that can get the job done in the right circumstances, right? We've seen it before. You get him a good offensive line and some good weapons, he can take your team to the Super Bowl. He can run one of the best offenses in the league. He's shown it time and time again when he has the support, when he has the time, like he did in his year where he took the Rams to the Super Bowl. That offensive line was elite. He had a great run game with Todd Gurley. He had some insane wide receivers on that team. That team was great. That offense was stacked. The offensive line was so good, and he's in a very similar situation now in Detroit. And the one thing you need to be careful with in Detroit now that you've paid Jared Goff all this money is to not let that offensive line go to waste. You can't forget about that offensive line. They've invested a lot in the defense. They've invested a lot in the offensive line in the past. They're starting to invest more in the defense. 2 top picks were corners. Both of them are looking to make a big impact in year one. The Lions need to be careful not to let that offensive line go to waste, because we've seen Jared Goff without an offensive line, and I can tell you it's not pretty. Jared Goff without an offensive line is not a situation you want to be locked into, paying him $50+ million a year. Jared Goff is not a piece that you can throw into a puzzle anywhere. He's a corner piece. He's one of those pieces that has to go on the edges. He connects everything into place, but if you don't have the rest of that puzzle, it's not going to look good. He can only go in one spot, and it has to have a good offensive line. And the weapons, he's a good enough quarterback that if he has time, he can make okay weapons work. And it's great when you have great weapons like the Lions do. But this contract can age poorly. And we've seen a contract like this for this exact quarterback age poorly. Jared Goff got paid after that Super Bowl run. Then the line fell apart for the Rams, and so did Jared Goff. The Lions just need to be very careful how they continue to build their team now. They've committed to Jared Goff for this Super Bowl window. And this is a Super Bowl window, don't get it wrong. You were in the NFC Championship game last season. You only got better. You didn't really lose too many pieces. You still have a lot of young guys on cheap contracts. This is your Super Bowl window, and you've committed to Jared Goff, which is a good option. He's proven he can get you there, but you just need to be careful, because Jared Goff is the kind of quarterback that you live and die with the sword with him. He'll have his games where he'll throw 4 interceptions, and then he'll come back next week and he'll throw 4 touchdowns. You have to live and die by that sword, and Jared Goff, to his credit, has improved under pressure. He's not that statue that he was in LA. He's gotten a lot better under pressure, but it's still not the most he's still not the most confident quarterback under pressure. It's a little bit of an overpay. A couple years from now, we're going to look at it as a fine contract, assuming that he's able to keep up this level of play. This is just something that the Lions need to be very careful of, because the Rams fell into this trap and they sold their soul for a guy like him, and they were able to make a 1-for-1 trade with the Lions to get Matthew Stafford. So it worked out, but usually you can't make those kind of trades. Usually a future Hall of Fame quarterback is not just available to be traded and basically 1-for-1. So that's one of those things that just doesn't happen all the time. So good news, it worked out for the Rams only because they were able to dump him. The Lions don't want to get into that situation, so they just need to be a little more careful with how they handle the team around Jared Goff, and they've learned from the past with LA. But Jared Goff gets a 4-year, $214 million extension. He is now the second highest paid quarterback in the league. Let me know what your thoughts are. I think it's a bit of an overpay, and I think that we're kind of forced to do it, honestly. There's times where you're kind of forced to pay a quarterback, and Jared Goff, taking him to the NFC Championship game, your hands kind of forced. You don't want to go into the unknown. He was an expiring contract. You don't want to go to the unknown in a Super Bowl window without a quarterback. You're not committing for too long. 4 years isn't that bad, but we'll see how this works out. Congratulations, Jared Goff. Congratulations, Lions, getting your guys back. This team should be really good. They're a contender in the NFC, and they need to be able to keep this up while they're in the Super Bowl window. Anyway, like I was saying, let me know your thoughts on this Jared Goff contract in the comments. I'd love to hear them. But in the next segment, we're going to hit the next big contract news in the NFL, that being Antoine Winfield Jr. with the Bucs. He gets signed to a new massive contract to stay with the Buccaneers for another couple years, resetting the defensive back market. We'll talk about that in the next segment coming up on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, I'll diss my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we have just finished talking about the breaking news in the NFL coming out right before our show started. Jared Goff and the Lions agree on a 4-year, $214 million deal, making him the second highest paid quarterback by average annual value. Congratulations to him. Congratulations to the Lions. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Leave that in the comment. But in this segment here coming up, we're going to continue to talk about the NFL. We're going to move into another contract that happened. This time it is a market resetting contract with the Buccaneers. And we'll talk about all about that coming up in just a second. But before we do, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message will pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you want to control what we talk about here on the show, a burning question about sports, anything, go ahead and leave a message either in the comments or in the donation. We appreciate anything you do give. You can control what we talk about here on the show. I appreciate all of you taking time out of your day on a beautiful Monday morning or afternoon. And like I was saying, we're going to get right into it. The Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, all they've done this offseason is bring the band back together. And they continue that trend by signing Antoine Winfield Jr. to a market resetting value, not just for safeties, but for the entirety of defensive backs. This time taking Antoine Winfield Jr., their safety, who they had franchise tagged, and giving him a 4-year, $84.1 million deal, making him the highest paid defensive back. He's so good. He got snubbed from a Pro Bowl this last season. He was really, really good he was really good for the Bucs, and they're able to bring him back. The Bucs all off season have been bringing back their guys. They brought back Mike Evans. They brought back Baker Mayfield. They brought back Levante David. They've now brought back Antoine Winfield Jr. They're doing their best to run it back in a division that the Falcons all offseason have been seemingly taking over. Now, the Bucs are the team that won last season, so they're the defending champions. They're going to try and run it back. It's going to be a harder division this time, assuming that Kirk Cousins is back 100% healthy, and reports are that he's cleared and he's ready to get throwing again, which is great news for the Falcons after investing a lot of money and value into the quarterback position. But Antoine Winfield Jr. getting a market resetting contract, and we just talked about this with the quarterbacks. It's good to see safeties start to get the love, and I think a lot of it kind of switched last season when we saw the impact a safety can have on defense. Kyle Hamilton with the Ravens, what he did kind of leading that defense, it took the attention back to the safeties, and safeties haven't really had this kind of attention on them since Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu were battling back in the day. Those elite safeties. Now Antoine Winfield Jr. gets money. We've seen Xavier McKinney get huge money in this offseason. There's lots of guys out here that have been getting huge money. You take a look at the highest paid safeties heading into the next season. Antoine Winfield, $21 million AAV. Derwin James with the Chargers, $19 million. Minkah Fitzpatrick, $18 million. Xavier McKinney, we just talked about. Jesse Bates, $16 million. The safety market is starting to get more and more valued, and it's an important position because they're kind of that last line of defense. They're kind of asked to be a corner and linebacker at the same time sometimes. Now, there's obviously two different kinds of safeties, and they're asked to do a whole lot of different things depending on the defensive system. But the safety is a very important position in defense, and it's kind of been overlooked a little bit. It's starting to get more and more back into the spotlight again. Positional value is a big discussion. We have it every year. Last year, it was centering around running backs. Hey, you shouldn't take a running back that high in the draft, or hey, you shouldn't pay a running back that much. And this year it's kind of around safeties. The safety market has exploded. Safeties are they're not going too high in the draft. I think our first safety went off the board at the end of the first, beginning of the second this year, which is about right for a safety nowadays. But we're starting to see a new kind of market show up for safeties. And the Buccaneers, much like the Lions, are bringing everybody back. They're trying to run it back, go on another title defense. They won a playoff game last season. Why not run it back? You made a divisional round. You had a really successful season. People were predicting them to be the worst team in the NFL, and they're able to win a playoff game. So congratulations to them. Antoine Winfield deserves that money. It is insane, the numbers that he was able to put up last season, and he still got snubbed from a Pro Bowl. So, you talk about some of the stuff that he was able to put up. Antoine Winfield Jr., he had 3 interceptions, 222 combined tackles, 6 sacks as a safety. Uh, he was he was so good. You look at look at some of the advanced stats uh, from him. 76 solo tackles. Uh, he was he was a he was top 6 in defensive player of the year voting. He was on the All Pro team. First time he's made an All Pro in his career. Uh, it's hard to overstate how good he was last season, but definitely his best season. He's going to be huge for Tampa heading into the future. He's going to be a defensive cornerstone for them. Uh, Hopefully he's able to keep this up. 4 years, $84 million, 21 a year, resetting the market for corners and safeties. Good to see safety representation. The safety market really has been going off all off season. You know, we talk about Xavier McKinney that got a big contract. Now Antoine Winfield gets a contract, and looking back at the franchise tags players, he was franchise tagged. There's only one player left that has not been franchise tagged, and that is T. Higgins. And T. Higgins is a whole nother can of worms. T. Higgins requested a trade. Then he said he expected to play for the Bengals, and then he requested a trade again. Bengals don't seem like they want to trade him. All reports are, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they're all saying, hey, we're a better team with T. Higgins here. But T. Higgins wants that number one money, and he deserves that number one money because he is a number one receiver. You throw him on half the teams in the NFL, maybe even more than half of the teams in the NFL, and he's a number one receiver. He's that kind of special talent. He'll fetch some money next season. The Bengals just don't have the money to afford him. Like I said in that first segment, they're paying Joe Burrow $55 million. They have to pay Jamar Chase market resetting money. They can't reset the market twice in the same position. They can't one up themselves. It's not gonna work for their money books as far as building a whole team. And their defense is starting to fall apart too. Trey Hendrickson is requesting a trade. Doesn't seem like they're gonna budge on him. He is such an important part of that defense, such an underrated part of the Cincinnati Bengals' success. But anyway, the Buccaneers finish off. They just need the next player up looks like is Tristan Wirfs. He should get an extension soon based on the trends. He's been really good as well. The Bucs are making sure that their homegrown talent stays home. This is how you build a culture. They're doing a great job. The Lions too. They're building a culture, a winning culture. You bring the guys that bring success. Build a culture. Anyway, we're going to transition out of the NFL in this next segment, and we're going to talk a little bit about the NBA. The rest of the show should be NBA. We're going to get into 2 series that really kind of took a 180 turn over the weekend in the Knicks, Pacers, and the Wolves, Nuggets. We'll talk about those 2 series, and then we'll end our show talking about the draft lottery where the Atlanta Hawks win surprisingly. They beat the odds. They win the lottery over the Pistons, who pick 5th. We'll talk about all that coming up next on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about the massive contracts given out in the NFL. We talked about Jared Goff getting his near market resetting money, $52 million a year, 4 years, $212 million, 170 guaranteed. And then we talked about Antoine Winfield Jr. resetting the safety market, getting $21 million a year over 4 years. $45 million of that is guaranteed. Huge contracts given out today in the NFL. But we're going to transition out of the NFL today now, and we're going to talk about the NBA. We are going to talk a little bit about the developments in some of these series, making it a little more interesting. Heading into the weekend, some of these series looked like they were over. In fact, almost all of them, you could take a step back and say, I feel pretty confident in saying that it's over. But they've all gotten a little closer now. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about the Timberwolves series with the Denver Nuggets. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be a bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message will pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. Appreciate you all taking time out of your day to watch, listen, and take a look at Talk Some Sports with me. Again, if you would like to leave a tip or donation, go to the link on screen right now. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Like I was saying, we are going to get a little bit into the NBA, and we're going to start our NBA coverage talking about the Nuggets-Wolves series, maybe the most anticipated series of this entire NBA playoffs. The Nuggets looked like they were dead after dropping the first 2 games at home, heading into Minnesota over the weekend, where Anthony Edwards has just been incredible this entire series. They lost Game 2 in a landslide without Rudy Gobert playing at all. That defensive 7-foot massive player down there to play a little defense against Nikola Jokic. And now, just a couple days later, the series is tied at 2. 2-2, the Nuggets are back. And they made people look silly by saying they were done. What happened to the Nuggets is they woke up. I've been saying this all playoffs long. The Nuggets need to stop sleepwalking. And that Game 2 slap in the face 30-point loss, if that wasn't what woke them up, nothing was going to wake them up. And they woke up. Nikola Jokic said, hey guys, watch this. And he went to work. He showed why he is the best basketball player in the world right now. There was some incredible defense being played on them last night. It didn't matter. The Timberwolves, the Nuggets just couldn't miss. The Nuggets had their 4th best shooting half in franchise history in Game 4. In Game 3, they just dominated tape to tape. There was nothing that the Wolves could do about it. It's not like the Wolves have stopped playing defense. Defense is their bread and butter. And if you watch these last couple games, the Wolves have done a really good job playing defense, especially against a guy like Nikola Jokic, and it just does not matter. Jamal Murray went on a tear in that third quarter, hit a buzzer beater at halftime from past half court, stole all the momentum, went on a tear in the second half, and could not miss a shot, seemingly. Then Nikola Jokic took over. He was getting double-teamed. It was great defense. No one was fouling. They were just keeping their hands up, making it hard. But it's one of those things that the Denver Nuggets just, Nikola Jokic especially, it doesn't matter what you do against him. If he wants a bucket, he's going to get a bucket. And it's tough. I don't know how the Timberwolves are going to come back in this series. All the momentum has shifted to the Nuggets side. Anthony Edwards puts up 44 points and they still lose. You can't lose a game if you're Minnesota with Anthony Edwards putting up 44 points. That's just not how you're going to be able to play successful basketball. You talk about a team like the Timberwolves. They're like what we've talked about all this entire season. What's really propelled them forward is they have that defense. They have the defensive player in the year, 4-time defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert. He comes in there, anchors that defense. Jaden McDaniels on the outside. Anthony Edwards is solid at defense in his own right. He's not going to set the world on fire with his defensive ability, but his defense is nothing to scoff at either. You know, this Wolves team plays together, and again, even in this game 3, they just nothing went right for them. But even in game 4, when they were playing great defense, the Nuggets were able to get basically whatever they wanted. And this is the Nuggets team that won the championship. This is the Nuggets team that we've been waiting on really all season long. They finally woke up. Minnesota beat them so bad that they woke up the beast. And it's going to be tough to contain them for the rest of the playoffs. I still think the Wolves might be able to take another game here or there. They were dueling with them down the stretch. They were. They got it back within 10. They kept it close all the way to the end. It ended up being like an 8-point game at the end, but the Timberwolves can put up a fight. They've shown they have the ability to beat them, and they've shown they have the ability to beat them shorthanded. They just need to tap back into that and get a little bit more lucky. The Nuggets aren't going to shoot like they did in game 4 every single game. That is just something that you can't expect them to do. You can't expect the Nuggets to have a top 5 shooting performance in their history every single night. And the Nuggets aren't counting on that. But what you can count on if you're the Nuggets is Nikola Jokic doing whatever he wants. Yeah. 8-point game at the end of it. But it's not where you want to be if you're the Timberwolves. You want to take one game and keep it, and they able to. Denver is not going to be able to shoot 57% every single night. They just aren't. This is a game that Minnesota would win most nights. Karl Anthony Towns kind of took him down, 5 for 18 shooting. He needs to be a little more selective with his shot as that number 2 option. Anthony Edwards, super efficient. But a big reason why, aside from Nikola Jokic, Aaron Gordon only missed one shot, 27 points on 11 of 12 shooting. He's not going to be able to do that every night. So, taking a look at this, there's still hope for the Wolves. There really is. Don't give up. If you're a Wolves fan, there's plenty of things that can still go right for you, in the rest of this series. Heading into the future, they need to start making shots and be a little more selective outside of Anthony Edwards. I've got nothing to say for Anthony Edwards. He's been playing great. He's been a monster. Outside of Jalen Brunson, he's been the best player in the entire playoffs by really a wide margin. Them two have been battling for the best all playoffs long. So we take a look at those two guys. It's really impressive what they've been able to do carrying their team offensively. Because both of those teams are kind of built similarly. And we'll talk a little bit about the Knicks in the next segment, actually blowing their own 2-0 lead, but for very different reasons. I'm very excited for the rest of this series. The Nuggets have their groove back, and it's going to be really tough for anyone to beat them. The Wolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Mavericks, anyone, the Celtics, the Knicks, the Pacers, the Cavs, anybody. It's going to be really tough for them to go and beat Denver now that they're awake. The question is, how long can they keep this up for? Because something that isn't talked about often about championship teams or consistent championship teams is how long that season is. You're playing until June, and then you get a much shorter break, and then you play until June again. It starts to wear on you. It starts to wear you down a little bit, which is probably why they've been sleepwalking this whole season. But we'll see if they're able to keep that up. I am not too worried about them. Like I said, they've been sleepwalking this whole season, and a team that's just been kind of lumbering along and was still the second best team in a stacked Western Conference is super scary. I don't think there's anyone in the West that can really compete with them. The Nuggets are just that good, especially when they are awake and motivated and hitting their shots. But anyway, in our next segment, like I said, we are going to talk about the other series that is tied at 2 now, that being the Knicks and the Pacers. and maybe give a little bit of a preview on the other two NBA series that have been going on. So stick around for that. We'll be right back on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on...
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished breaking down the Nuggets finally waking up and taking the next two games of the series to even the series at 2 over the weekend with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Both teams have taken both games on the road, and they head back to Denver to play their next game on tomorrow. So we'll see what happens in Game 5 there. The other series that I wanted to talk about, and we'll get to it in just a second, is the Knicks series. The Knicks also went up 2-0 and now find themselves in a similar position to the Timberwolves, tied at 2. They are heading back to Madison Square Garden, though. We'll talk about the different circumstances for this series collapse as opposed to the Wolves series collapse. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message will pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you want to control what we talk about here on the show, leave a comment, leave a donation. We will get to it as soon as we possibly can. Appreciate all of you for sticking around, watching the show, talking some sports with me. As always, if you have anything you'd like to add, go ahead and leave it in the comments. Leave a donation at gsmcpodcast.net. Appreciate you sticking around. But like I was saying, we're going to talk about the Pacers go home and they dominate both games. Game 3 was particularly brutal. They win on a shot clock beating turnaround 50-footer or so from Andrew Nembhard. A desperation shot from him as he puts them up 3. Jalen Brunson's a chance. He's all playoffs. He thought they were going to foul him. He throws up a flailing shot, and it's just ugly. The game ends. The Pacers win Game 3, and then they just dominate Game 4. They win that game by 30. But Game 3 was particularly brutal because of what happened to some of their star players. Jalen Brunson, he goes down. He goes down in Game 2, is able to come back, but is clearly not 100%. OG Anunoby, a guy who the Knicks are 26-5 with him in the lineup, goes down. They're under 500 without him since he's joined the team. And we're starting to see why. He hasn't played since Game 2. And Jalen Brunson and OG Anunoby is a huge, huge part of what the Knicks are trying to do. His defensive ability, he might not light up the stat sheet, but he stops the Knicks from playing Alec Burks 30 minutes a game. You know, Alec Burks played a pretty solid game overall. 23 Alec Burks minutes in the playoffs is not really what you want, but they don't really have another option. They're so injured right now. It sucks. It really does. Hartenstein got hurt and kind of banged up his shoulder in Game 4, and we're starting to see the issues with the wear and tear that Tibbs puts on his players. You know, injuries catch up to him. It happened in almost every single playoff run he's been a part of, and it's not the whole reason why he hasn't been a super successful playoff coach, but it definitely is part of it. We talk about nowadays in the NBA this idea of resting players and how players are resting, they want to be healthy for the playoffs. Thibodeau plays his starters 48 minutes a game. Josh Hart, I mean, he says he wants to do it, and more power to him. That's awesome. I love the way he plays basketball, but it's gotta be it can't be good for you to play a full season of every single minute of every single game. And the Knicks don't usually go this far deep into their roster. They usually don't. They played they played 4 or 5. They played 11 players in game 4. Granted, a lot of that was garbage time minutes, guys that usually wouldn't see the floor, but they're dealing with injuries. They're working on new rotations, trying to get the best things out there. It's just tough. Jalen Brunson didn't have his best game. He was inefficient, 0 of 5 from 3. Their three-point shooting was abysmal in game 4. This is not the kind of shooting they're used to, shooting 18% from 3. They'd basically been shooting 50% before that in the playoffs. And when you go from 50% to 20%, that's going to take a pretty big toll on you as far as, being a successful team. So there's a lot of different reasons why the Knicks have started to drop, whether it be the Pacers' home court advantage. The Pacers are much better at home. They have a rocking home crowd. They struggle on the road all season. That's why they're a 6th seed as opposed to a higher seed. Although in the East, this is a 2 seed versus a 6 seed. They're separated by 3 games, so it's not that huge of a difference. You're taking a look at a Pacers team that is healthy. A Pacers team that Tyrese Halliburton is starting to get his shot back. Miles Turner didn't miss a shot in game 4. And we talked about Nembhard, what he did, his heroics at the end of game 3. They're getting production from everywhere. Obi Toppin has quietly been a huge part of their playoff runs. I mean, you take a look at what he's been averaging in these playoffs. It's been really good. The postseason this year, in 20 minutes of action, he's shooting 50% from the field, 35% from 3, with 12 points a game, 4 or 5 rebounds a game, 2 assists. That's really great numbers coming off the bench for a guy like Obi Toppin, and he comes in with energy. He really keeps them invested in the game. And another guy off the bench, TJ McConnell, has been huge for them. He seemed like he couldn't miss from 3. He had 15 points in game 4. Really, the Pacers just dominated that whole game. 45% from 3, 56% from the field. They only took 8 free throws. The Knicks took 31. So that's something to look at. I know they play different styles of games. The Pacers are much more an outside shooting team. They don't have the big guys to really, drive down the lane too much. But that's a pretty big free throw discrepancy. You start to look at, some of the other games here. Game 3, for instance, is not that big of a free throw discrepancy. It didn't really matter in this game because they dominated. But something to keep an eye on for the future. It seems like this game's the only one where it really made a difference, or where it really popped out, 31-8. But overall, the Pacers just are better at home, and I don't know if it's a hinge. Aren't things just come in and say, okay, I'm good now. Hamstrings are tough. They can really bug you and bother you. Through the rest of the season, it's an injury that can just nag you for a really, really long time. Never want to say, hey, you're good to go, get out there and make it worse, especially the way that the Knicks do their rotations with guys like OG Anunoby. If he was healthy, would be playing 35, 40 minutes a game. And he's just a part of the team defensively. We know much better with him on the court. The Pacers and the Knicks, we talked about this in game 1, to play their kind of game. 120, 110, 120 points every single game. This is the kind of game that the Pacers want to play. Fast pace, wear out the Knicks. The Knicks want to play more like they did against the 76ers, where it was 100-90 in all these games, as opposed to 120-115. 130 to 120. That's more the type of game that the Knicks want to play. And the Pacers, to their credit, are doing a great job playing their game regardless of what the Knicks are trying to get them to do. So we'll see what happens in the rest of the series. We're heading back to New York tomorrow. So home team has dominated all of these games. The Pacers blew them out, unlike any other game that there has been all series long. But heading back to New York, it should be good for a team like the Knicks. It should be good overall for the Knicks. Heading back home, they're just a much better team at home, and hopefully they'll get OG Anunoby back if they want to win. He's a huge loss. It really is a huge loss. And I think people are talking about it enough. Again, one more time, the Knicks are 26-5 with him on the court and under 500 without him. It's really shown on the road. And maybe, and again, it's a small sample size. It's not all him. He would not have won Game 4, but with him on the court, I think they might have dropped. They might have won Game 3. You know, a lucky shot by a bad possession on the other end when they could tie it leads to now a tied series. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the NBA series. I think the Nuggets will complete comeback. It's going to be tough. But anyway, let me hear your thoughts on anything in the NBA. We are going to finish off our show in the next segment talking about the NBA draft lottery. The Hawks win the draft lottery. They beat the odds and get the number 1 overall pick in an interesting draft class. We'll talk about that more in just a second, right here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back, everybody, to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. If you were just tuning in, or I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you were just tuning in, we just finished talking about the 2 series that got knotted up at 2 over the weekend. That being the Minnesota Nuggets series and the Knicks Pacers series. We talked about those, why these series got evened up, and what we're looking at for the rest of the series. Real quick, before we get into our topic of the NBA draft lottery, we have more breaking news. It's a big breaking news day. Breaking news out of the sports world of hockey. If you were watching the Canucks-Oilers game last night, the Canucks took it 4-3 to give themselves a 2-0 lead, a 2-1 lead in that series. After the whistle sounded, there was a scuffle behind the net involving Connor McDavid and a couple of Canucks players. As of 5 minutes ago, it is penalties have been handed out. The most important news: Carson Soucy has been suspended for 1 game for a cross check after the whistle of Connor McDavid. it's a big loss for them. The defense has been such a huge part of of keeping the Canucks ahead of the Oilers. Shilos, their goalie, has been really good for a third string. He he was so good last night. I don't want to get too far off topic because I do have a lot to say about the NBA draft, but summing it up real quick, this is a big blow for the Canucks to be out one of their defensemen for one part of the series, a series that's super important. It's against a super dangerous offensive team like the Oilers. I'll talk more about that at another time. But anyway, like I was saying, we're going to get into the NBA draft. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That'll pop up at the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. Appreciate anything you do give. Again, that link to leave a tip or donation is on the screen right now. That's gsmcpodcast.net. But like I was saying, we're going to talk about the NBA draft lottery. And for those who are unaware, the NBA draft lottery is what it sounds like. Unlike the NFL, how it works is if you have the worst record in the NFL, you get the best pick. In the NBA, to avoid tanking, the NBA draft lottery has been put into place, and it's been more and more random over the years to decrease the effect of tanking, and we really saw it this year take a huge effect. We're taking a look at they draw balls, it gets released, and it was a crazy draw this season. The Atlanta Hawks, who made the play-in tournament, get the first overall pick, getting to add in what is a really weak draft class by recent standards. Now, we're not comparing it to Victor Wembanyama, but overall, it's a very weak draft class, comparing it to a lot of draft classes in recent memories. The Hawks get the number 1 overall pick. No consensus number 1. Alex Sarr is one of those guys that's been put out there, and he would pair really well with Trae Young. But the bigger story of this draft is the Detroit Pistons. The Detroit Pistons have now the worst record in the league, and they're picking 5th overall, which is brutal as a Pistons fan. You watched your team tie an all-time record for losses in a row. 28 losses in a row, they had that stretch. And now they don't even get the number 1 overall pick in a weak draft. But, them and the Hornets, who are picking at 6, both had horrendous seasons, and they're picking behind the Atlanta Hawks, who made the play-in tournament, I know it's technically not the playoffs, but in my brain, it is the playoffs. It's the postseason. It's after the regular season. You made the play-ins, you made the playoffs, basically. Or pre-playoffs, whatever you want to call it. It is a good thing. I'm just going to put that out bluntly. I love the draft lottery. There's been some reactions saying, "Hey, get rid of the draft lottery. It's ruining the Pistons got the 5th pick. What are they doing?" No, this is good. The NBA has a chronic tanking problem, and not saying that the Pistons were tanking. I'm not sitting here and saying that, because I think they were really trying. They just were bad. But there are teams that have been tanking openly. The 76ers with the process. That's a whole thing. Trust the process. Tank. It'll work, I promise. It hasn't really worked. You got one good player out of it, but that's just bad drafting. That's a whole nother thing. You're not guaranteed it. Tanking is de-incentivized, which is really super important for a league like the NBA, that really the regular season doesn't matter for a lot of these teams. You can go in and you can say, "Hey, I know my team is going to make the playoffs," or "I know my team isn't going to make the playoffs." For about 80% of the teams in the league, you can look at their roster and look at what they've done and say, "Hey, I know what you're going to do." Now, there's always a surprise team or two, but in general, you can get 90% of it right, barring injuries, of course. So the draft lottery is a good thing. The Hawks get, in a relatively weak draft class, the number 1 overall pick, followed up by the Wizards at number 2. This is the first time the Hawks have won the draft lottery ever. They've been a really middling team. I think if you go back to 1975, they had a 500 record for some time. So that's insane. That's some kind of consistency right there. The most average team, and they get the number one overall pick. See what they will do with it. We'll see if this affects Trae Young, if he decides to get traded, DeJounte Murray, his market, or if the Hawks just decided to run it back one more year with DeJounte Murray, Trae Young, and whoever they decide to draft. This is a huge opportunity for them. I don't think there's anyone in this draft that jumps off the paper and makes me think, oh, you have to get this guy. But if you go get a complementary piece to Trae Young, maybe maybe a big. I know there's not a lot of bigs in this draft that you would take with the number one overall pick, but a solid big man that can do exactly what Clint Capella did when he was good on that one run to the Eastern Conference Finals. If they can get someone like that, or if they can get a guard that can pair with him better, get a defensive-minded guard that can work off-ball, stuff like that, that could pair well with Trae Young, pass the ball really well. They just need to build around Trae Young, and this is a good draft class to build around a guy. This isn't a draft class to get the guy, but this is a really great draft class to build around the guy. So the Hawks getting that number one overall pick is kind of a really good thing for them. Obviously getting the number one overall pick is a good thing, but this isn't like, oh, this is going to be a wealth of talent on the Hawks now. This is just something that you're saying, hey, you know what? The Hawks are going to get a solid player. And that's really what they need to make them and take that next step. Now, it's not going to jump them into championship contention. It might, depending on who they get, and you could always be surprised. More breaking news. This has been lots of breaking news for you. We got a little bit of a Woj alert here. Real quick before we end the show, Donovan Mitchell is out for Game 4 against the Celtics after the Cavs take Game 3. Sorry to be all disjointed, but lots of stuff is going on here. Got to cover that. That's huge for the Celtics. The Celtics that the Cavs, again, are a good team. It's just, I don't think they match up too well with the Celtics. Jason Tatum hasn't played his best ball, but without Donovan Mitchell, who's been basically their only consistent offensive force for the time being as for the Cavs, it's going to be tough for them to be really good. But one last thought on the draft lottery. It sucks for the Pistons. It really does. It's brutal. This is the second time that they've had the worst record and not had the number one overall pick. And it sucks to be all the way down at 5. But they can recover. They had some bright spots this last season. It's not all doom and gloom as a Pistons fan. I know it might seem like that, but they're on the right track, I think. Slightly on the right track. Need to make some big additions this offseason and have a good draft, most importantly. But they're on the right track. Anyway, thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Tune in, same time, same place tomorrow, where we will be talking about all the breaking news in the world of sports. It's been a wild day today. No reason to expect that to let up tomorrow. Usually stuff starts to snowball. So I'm very excited to see what happens the rest of this week. We'll talk more playoffs, everything like that. But thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.